So let's go through a bit more of what we mean by analysis of this result. So once we finish our vector digest, we do not recommend to do a simple PCR cleanup and move on. We urge you to visualize what your sample actually looks like, to make sure that the reaction has worked, to make sure that your sample that you started off with was actually of good quality. We in PEP will often do a DNA gel extraction because we like the control that gives us over the fragments that we're using. So how we do that is on a standard DNA agarose gel, we will run an aliquot of the uncut vector that we have used to set up our digest reaction to begin with. 200 nanograms, 500 nanograms, just enough for us to visualize what that sample looks like. And the reason we do this is, if our vector digest reaction hasn't worked, we want to make sure that the materials we've started off with were good to begin with. And if this result is showing us degradation patterns or multiple populations, we know not to even worry about what the reaction has done because the initial material wasn't good enough to start off with. So always run that as a control, very critical. We then ran our sample of digested vector in two different lanes. So one will have majority. If it's a 50 microliter reaction, then one lane will have 45 microliters, the other will have about 5 microliters. And we want to put the sample with the most amount of volume in the very, very far end lane. Why we do this is when we visualize this on a UV illuminator, we want to actually cut this gel in half and expose only the small sample to UV. In case you didn't know, UV is very, very damaging to DNA, extremely damaging. It's why we put on sunscreen, right? So think about your DNA as a very precious sample. You don't want to be exposing your actual sample you'll be using for downstream processes to UV. So by cutting this gel in half, we can visualize using the very small aliquot what the band looks like, where it is. We can mark it and then use that as a guide to extract our actual sample later on without exposing it to UV.